Chapter 25 is looking at the growth of the American city between 1865 and 1900. Now, to start with, all of this stuff is intertwined that we've already been talking about. The increase in immigration to the United States, the growth of the large cities because people were moving to the cities to find jobs in the factories, the use of steel to build the skyscrapers. All of this stuff is intertwined that we've already been discussing. So as a result, between 1870 and 1900, the population in the American cities tripled after the war because of that immigration, because of the movement away from an agrarian society to an industrial society. We became a nation of city dwellers, more so than we've ever been in the past. And the only reason, or one of the reasons that this was possible, was because of the creation of the skyscraper, using steel in order to build our cities upward as opposed to outward. You know, in a small amount of territory, you need to fit as many people as you can. That's not going to be possible if all of our buildings are 4 stories high. We have to build them higher than that. And so because steel is used, you can have this lighter material and stronger material to build our buildings vertically. And we can also use the new invention of the electric elevator to transport people to the very top. Also important to this movement to a more modern style of architecture is the father of modern architecture, Louis Sullivan, who focused on the idea of form and function, form over function, that we are focusing not just on how beautiful these buildings are, but the function that they provide as well. And so this is the birth of modern architecture today. Also important to the growth of the large cities is the creation of mass transit, specifically trolley-type services. Later on, subways would be used as well. This allowed people to move all over the city, from the residential district over to the business district or the industrial district, or even from the inner ring suburbs that are immediately on the outskirts of the city. The inner ring suburbs, or as they were called, bedroom communities back then, this is where the middle class and the upper classes would move to in order to avoid the dirt, the squalor, the poverty of those that were living in the cities, but could still easily commute into the city for their job by using the trolley service. And so people come to the city for all different reasons. Country people are being drawn for those industrial jobs, also because there is a certain city lifestyle that is very enticing. Indoor plumbing, telephone, the creation of department stores, and especially with the creation of department stores, because remember, we have a growing middle class at this time. They want to buy stuff. They want to show their new status in life. And so we see the creation of a culture of consumerism, more so than ever before in American history. Americans want to have stuff. We want to buy stuff. And this is heavily fueled by more and more advertising, telling us that the stuff that we already have isn't good enough. So we want to continue to buy, buy, buy. Lucky for us, department stores are being built all over these new cities, like Macy's as a prime example of one of the first department stores that draws in middle-class shoppers to buy new products. And living in the city, and because we are a culture of consumerism, society has become much more wasteful at this time. There's a lot of stuff that we're throwing away that we've never thrown away before, that had once gone to some sort of a need on the family farm. There's a lot of packaging that's now going to be thrown away. New fashions, you have to throw out the old fashions. And so waste management becomes a real issue in the modern day city. Number one, because the population density is so large, and number two, because we are throwing away so much stuff that cities like New York, Chicago, Philadelphia, they're not used to having to deal with this. And so we really do see a difference. We've already talked about this growing divide between the wealthy and the middle class and then the poor. That's even more so prevalent in where these people are living. Those who were too poor to escape the city living were trapped in the slums. You're talking about overcrowding. You're talking about disease. You're talking about all the garbage, the lack of clean water. This is very prevalent for the city dweller in the early 1900s, late 1800s, versus those people that were able to move out to those commuter suburbs or the bedroom communities right on the outskirts of town, but still could commute into the city on the trolley in order to make it to work. Here you see some of these slum living standards. Very, very overcrowded, very small amount of space. And part of the reason for this overcrowding is because the massive growth in immigration. Now, starting around the 1880s to about 1910, 1915-ish era, we see a whole new influx of new type immigrants coming into the United States, approximately 5 million per year. These are the Ellis Island immigrants coming in, so to speak. Before 1880, the old immigrants, as they were called, were primarily from Western Europe. They were Protestant, obviously, except for those pesky Irish Catholics. A lot of them spoke the English language. They had a higher literacy rate. Many of them were used to a democratic style of government, meaning they were easier to assimilate or easier to get them to blend into American culture. But around 1880, we see a new type of immigrant coming to the United States, or the new immigrants as they're called, from Southern and Eastern Europe. Italians, Slovenians, Slovaks, Croats, Greeks, Poles, all of these new immigrants flooding into the United States, many of them being Orthodox Jews. They're going to be less welcome to the United States. They are used to dictatorship-style governments. And really, they're not looking to assimilate. They're more looking to find a job here in the United States as the industrial workers, oftentimes being used as scab laborers, which obviously added a whole new component to why the, quote, Native Americans hated these new immigrants. They grouped together in ethnic ghettos or ethnic neighborhoods, little Italies or little Slovenias of the day, and they weren't that interested in learning the language or assimilating. What is going to get them to assimilate is the required public education that is coming, and we'll talk about that later on. So with the growth of Europe's population, the use of all of these new technologies to grow food is meaning that the population is doubling in Europe at this time. They need to find more places to go. The lack of agricultural jobs and industrialization in Europe means that there's a high unemployment rate among Europeans. So they were coming to the United States to find jobs. What adds to this increase or this flooding in of the new immigrants are the letters home. So people that have already moved to the United States are sending letters back home about how there are jobs available. There are other Italians already living here, so why don't you come along? And another enticing feature, especially among Jewish immigrants, was the fact that there weren't pogroms here. They were escaping religious persecution. Pogroms are the predecessors to the Holocaust, the mass killing of Jewish people among the Russian population and Eastern Europe. So many of these new immigrants coming in order to escape religious persecution. And they're able to because they are able to get quick, easy, and inexpensive passage on steamships of the day, another side effect of that Industrial Revolution. So especially for the Jewish immigrants coming here to escape that religious persecution, many of them already were used to working in a city-like area. They were used to skilled labor, many of them working as tailors and things like that. And so this only added to the nativist resentments against these new immigrants. And like I said before, they're focusing on keeping the old ways. They're not looking to necessarily assimilate. But with the creation of public schools, they're not really going to have a choice. So, who was here in the United States to help these new immigrants assimilate? Basically, it's the political machines like we've already talked about. Think of Tammany Hall in New York as an example, welcoming in these new immigrants in order to get their vote when it comes time to vote. Helping them find jobs, helping them find a place to live, etc. But we also see a movement at this time among Christian socialists or people like them that are applying the ideas of Christianity to help out these new immigrants coming here. People like Washington Gladden. He founded a Congregationalist church in Columbus in 1882, and he said in his social gospel of the day that it was up to the churches to help fix these social problems that were occurring at this time, the crime and the problems the new immigrants were facing, etc., to help fix society. So Washington Gladden, his social gospel, it's the church's job. And according to Christian Socialists, another movement at this time, from this perspective, socialism was the inevitable outcome of Christianity. They would say, if you read the work of, or the New Testament, or what Jesus Christ did, Christianity would automatically lead us to socialism, helping everyone out. We're not going to leave people behind like the social Darwinists had wanted. So other social reformers of the day, a favorite on the AP exam is Jane Addams. Jane Addams was a social reformer in her day. She opened Hull House in Chicago, Illinois. This is a form of a settlement house, Hull House being the first one. The purpose of a settlement house was it's a place for the new immigrants to come. It's a place for them to get training or to get help finding a job, or to provide them with a social outlet, or a place for them to have child care during the day. It's basically to help assimilate them into American society and transition more into American society. So while Hull House was the first one in Chicago, this idea of the settlement house spread throughout the United States and becomes very popular throughout the United States, especially since more and more of these new immigrants were coming to the United States. Another reason that Jane Addams was so popular was because she is really expanding on the position of women, that women can play a leading role in social reform, similar to what we saw during the 1850s, that women are at the heart of all social reform. And it's the same as in the 1850s, it's the same as in early 1900, that now women can play a role helping these new immigrants find their place in American society. And this eventually leads to social work as a recognized female profession. And so while more and more women are working, and we've already talked about this already, more and more women are working, there's still occupations that are divided or segregated based on race, class, marital status, ethnicity, etc. So for example, African American women in the United States, pretty much all that was open to them was domestic service type work or similar occupations. The white-collar jobs, or the more less manual labor type jobs, were reserved to white native-born women, particularly from the middle class. And immigrant women were more clustered into the factory-type jobs or blue-collar jobs that were available to them. And so just like we've seen in the past, nativism continues on against these new immigrants. So the American Protective Association, the new nativist organization of the day, is obviously focusing on how can we stop these immigrants coming in and taking over. From their perspective, similar to what we've seen in the past, like from the Know Nothing Party. They said these new immigrants have a very high birth rate. They've got a low standard of living, and eventually they're going to outbreed us real Americans that are living here. Another nativist resentment against these new immigrants is the fact that they were used for cheap, unskilled labor. Like I said, they were often used as scabs. They were difficult to unionize, and so this only exacerbated that division between the native, quote-unquote, born Americans and these new immigrants. Many of these new immigrants are bringing with them very radical ideas on socialism, communism, anarchism, etc., which from a native-born perspective is kind of off-putting. So this only adds to the division between us versus them. So once again, the American Protective Association, their focus say that we need to protect American labor. We need to increase our immigration standards to keep these people out. And so we have seen already some immigration restrictions being put into place in the United States. 1882, Congress started restricting certain kinds of immigrants, criminals, convicts, people that were too poor to move here, and also the Chinese randomly. Which we've already talked about. Later on, tests would be proposed to include a literacy test, another way to keep a certain class of people out. However, these literacy tests were not actually implemented until 1917, but it shows you the lengths to which the nativists were willing to go to keep the wrong kind of people out. but happening at the same time. And it's almost ironic that we see this division in society between the nativists and these new immigrants. In 1886, France gave the United States this gift, the Statue of Liberty, that was obviously put in New York Harbor, and it was for many of these new immigrants the first image that they saw coming into Ellis Island. And the saying by Eliza Lazarus, I want to say her name is, that we should give us your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. You know, this almost dichotomous idea of we're welcoming all these new immigrants in while at the same time rejecting them too.